So hello everybody and welcome to another Rising Tide Talk. I'm Matt, Roleplay Chat Capelli, and today we will be talking about the importance of failure in your journey as a tabletop role-playing game content creator, a creative writer, map maker, podcaster, you name it. Hopefully failure will be applicable to all of you. I'm humbled today to be joined by Matthew from AbyssalBrews, somebody that I admire very much in the tabletop role-playing game space, someone who I've had the pleasure of watching grow from, a small indie creator. I mean, you're still a small indie creator, but your following has grown significantly over your time in the space, and it's been wonderful to watch all of your cool magic items that you guys crank out all the time. So please join me in welcoming Matthew to our interview today. Go crazy, chat. Let's go. Have chat go crazy.
It's wonderful to be
Welcome
here.
back.
I think the ask from this came in quite a while back, so it's nice to make it finally come to fruition and be here with folks and talk about something that's near and dear to my heart, failure.
Yes, and I think it's a super important topic. I'm really excited to talk to you about it because growing as a tabletop role-playing content creator is something that I think we all aspire to do to a certain degree, and failure kind of comes part and parcel with that. So it's something that I'm really excited to chat with you about, Matthew. So why don't we get right into it? And then at the end of the discussion tonight, I'm going to kind of reserve 15 minutes or so to go over your questions. I do have some questions prepped for you though, Matthew, and I've categorized them into 3 buckets. The first bucket is just, how to start failing. And, I know that sounds kind of ridiculous, but like, let's do it. Let's start failing. Let's start failing as a team. And yeah, let's do it. The next one is how to learn from that failure or how best to do so. And then the last one is kind of failure and reputation and how those 2 things kind of go hand in hand. So without further ado, I'll ask you the big question first. Matthew, I'm hoping to start us off, and now we're in the let's start failing category. I'm hoping to inspire people listening, just start failing. And that, I know that sounds really bad. I don't mean that I want people to fail their projects, but I want people to, initiate action and to learn from failures as they happen. And I wanted to ask you first and foremost, why is it that failure is important? What makes failure important, and how can we motivate people to start failing more? Not intentionally, but to start failing more.
It seems like it would be counterintuitive, right? Everybody wants a project to succeed whenever they start. I think that that's relatively normal. You want to think that the thing you're going to start is going to last forever. It's going to grow massive and it's going to be amazing. But what I've found is that when you are creating anything, you're not learning that much from the wins that you take away from things. You will learn what works, but the fastest way to find out what works is often to find out what doesn't work. So for me, this is a process of rapid iteration, if you want to call it that. And once you learn to not be afraid of those failures that you're facing along the way, I think that you develop a sense of kind of saying like, screw it, let's do it. Whatever it is, whatever idea comes your way, even if you know that there's going to be a million things that you don't know how to do, once you get over that initial fear of failure and start just being accepting and embracing it, you will find that you say yes to a lot more projects, even if you have no idea how to complete them. But the reality of it is, once you're in the middle of it, you'll figure out how to get to that completion point. Or you'll just fail again and you'll figure out that you did not, have the ability to do that particular thing. And that's okay. You roll it forward into the next project. Failure is important because it teaches you an iterative process. And that's something that every creator should probably have in their arsenal, a powerful iterative process to keep up with.
That's super good advice. It reminds me of a manager I once had who used to tell me, and it's somewhat related, but they used to tell me to fake it till I make it every single day.
Yeah.
Just like, fake it till you make it. Do what you can, and hopefully you come out of it knowing a little bit more about what you're doing.
one of my early examples of that was a graphic design professor that I had uh, in my bachelor's program. For those of you who don't know, that's my normal 9 to 5. AB is not a full time revenue, and it probably never will be, and that's okay. But my 9 to 5 is that I'm a graphic designer at a large university, and with that, whenever I was going through my bachelor's program, he scolded people often for caring too much about what they were making in the
Hmm.
process. They would get really like attached to what you were making, and he kept instilling into people and beating them over the head with the same thing over and over again, which is stop loving what you're making. Just stop loving it and make more. Because when you're starting out, he didn't mean that you can't, enjoy what you're doing. He meant that when you're starting out, hours logged is often more important than making a masterpiece. The person who graphic designs or paints or writes, 100 bad pieces is going to have more experience than the person who really put everything into writing 5. So that's kind of the process he was starting with.
I think that process is especially relevant in this context because we're often doing passion projects. The tabletop RPG community is a bunch of people who love what they're doing so much
Oh
that
yeah.
sometimes I think we can forget, right? We're not here to make a masterpiece. I know I needed to hear that. So thank you, Matthew. That's good. That's good.
Yeah. A masterpiece is
Yeah.
not something I'm in the interest of.
And I mean, maybe people will stumble upon it as they go upon their work, right? Yeah,
Right.
I like that. Another question I had for you, Matthew, was related to kind of the forms failure can take on.
Oh
And
yeah.
so, for us to be able to learn from failure in our next section, I think we need to be able to recognize failure and the kinds of failure that exist. So I was hoping you could take some time talking to us about what the different what forms can failure take on, whether that's through lived experience, and if you wanted to share those lived experiences with us, I think that could be cool, or just in the TTRPG context, what could failure kind of appear to us as?
Absolutely. So I kind of think of two big buckets, right? There's hard and soft failure. Those are kind of your two I would say, the biggest categories, but within that there's a lot of small ones and we can talk about those more as we go. But I think the first one that I'll talk about is hard failure because that's the one that people I think are thinking of most whenever you talk about failure. They're
Mm.
talking about those times where the project is done. You made a mistake, you ran out of money, you didn't grow, you can't finish the thing that you wanted to finish. People have walked away from it that were on your team, and the project is by all accounts done. That is hard failure. And those situations are often the ones that hurt a lot more. But within those, you can take a lot of lessons away from it. So I had this is really funny. Fernando is somebody that I've hard failed with a number of times, funnily enough. um, and that might seem silly, right? Like, oh, you guys are still doing projects. Yeah, he and I are both of the mindset that we fully understand that hard failure is an option at any time. And I mean, hey, AB could crash in the next week. We don't know. But when it comes to hard failures, one of the ones that we had was a board game. We were definitely going to develop a board game. We had both been interested in it. He had wanted to do the art. I had wanted to do a lot of the writing and kind of the story behind it. And we had a friend that really was great with kind of mechanical design and the kind of numbers and base math that goes into developing a board game. And so we decided that we were going to develop a board game, and it was awesome. We had a whole concept. It's called Gloomhaven. You might see remnants of it in the future. It's probably going to happen, but it was great. We had this whole like story representation and these various characters that were kind of the core characters of it, and we started to develop a website and a persona for everything. And I started writing a lot of the story. And what came out of this after a time is no matter how many times we got together to try to, design mechanics or design the um, kind of the core gameplay loop of it, we realized we just weren't good at that. And
Mm.
we did it over and over and over again and tried and tried and tried until eventually the other friend of ours who was involved in this found out that he was having a kid, which very exciting, awesome for him. But that was kind of the moment where we all looked at each other and we're like, "This isn't happening, is it?" And
Mm.
at that point, we had poured a lot into that. We had poured hours, we had poured time, we had poured money, we had poured, relationships and contacts in the field, all into this project. And it was in that kind of moment of abject realization that we had failed that it was the hardest for Fernando and I. I think our other friend was kind of okay with it because he had, something big else to focus on.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
for us, it was hard because we had this something that we were really excited about, something that we had created art for and designs for, and so on. But it was difficult. But within that, I learned something extremely valuable about myself, which is that I'm somebody who needs a project. Whenever I was kind of in that pre stage before we even started planning this, I was trying to figure out something to do. I didn't really have a path I wanted to follow or something I wanted to make. But during those times when we were working on Gloomhaven, that was probably the time that I was most excited about something that I was working on. So learning that I needed a project was a great outcome of that. I also learned that communication and organization is key and early, um, especially when it comes to kind of a passion project. You can't
Mhm.
just say like, "Oh, it's a passion project, so I don't need to organize." But I took several lessons from that, and that was this hard failure that we needed to reboot into something completely different if we wanted to continue. After that was kind of where AB was born. But that's your hard failure. And from those, I think recognizing that you have just hit a wall and saying, "Okay, this isn't going to work. I need to create a new project. I need to get started back from the base." Learning
Mhm.
that skill of learning when you're going to hit that wall and learning that from this point, that's okay. We failed. It's a hard failure. What needs to come next? That's a good time to do a post mortem. I always talk about a post mortem when it comes to failure, which is after the project is done, get together and if you can with your project mates, assuming it wasn't like a really really kind
Mhm.
of
It blew
bad
up in your face.
bad break, right, assuming it wasn't a bad break, get together with your partners and have a few adult beverages of your choice and just talk about what happened, where did the wheels fall off, and do a fun activity while you're talking about it, like play love letter or something like that. Make it a fun time rather than something that is hurtful and painful to talk about. Those are your hard failures, though. Recognizing those is pretty easy because you see that this is the end of the project. The
Mhm.
other kind of failure is a soft failure. And what I'm talking about with those is that the thing that I'm working on right now, that isn't going to work, but it doesn't kill the project. So, what do I do when those happen? Those are a different process than a hard failure. Hard failures require a postmortem often. I think soft failures, rather than focusing on the thing that just didn't work, it's more interesting to everybody involved in the project to then just start into the next thing. An example of this would be an early version of a thing that's still coming. I can't talk about it. I just realized I can't talk about it. We have an NDA.
But I mean, I
um,
like where you're going with this, Matthew. This idea of,
yeah,
a small step in a larger project, perhaps, that
yeah,
maybe it's a marketing campaign that just didn't hit the audience you thought it would.
yeah,
It's okay. You'll just do another one and learn from what didn't.
yeah.
Is that kind of where you're going with this?
Typically, with soft failures like that, it's when you reach the end of a of, the ability to do it, and you say, look, I just can't do that, so here's the next way I'm going to tackle that. I find for me those kind of steps they're a little weird, but they're weird in that you kind of don't have definitive process for how to continue sometimes. If you don't know what you don't know, then how do you continue forward? Like if you hit a technical limitation and you say, well, I just have no idea how to do that. Typically, your next step then is going to be to reach outside of your bubble. But for those soft failures, the ones that are smaller within, I don't think it's that vital to kind of spend time thinking about them that much, outside of like, that didn't work, onto the next thing that will work, or when that doesn't work, onto the next thing that will work. It's developing that rapid iterative process within a project. So those two big buckets, hard failures, that requires a lot of thought and time spent into what went wrong. Soft failures, I think, are more of your push through kind of situations, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Keep going. This piece didn't work, but it doesn't finish everything off. I really like that we talked about this, Matthew, because I was going to kind of prompt you about, the many forms failure can take. So I'm glad, or sorry, that's what I asked you about. But then I was thinking about, incremental failures versus large scale failures. And I think you already covered it. You covered that you've got these hard failures that, I would consider to be this big project ending type of thing. And then these softer failures that are generally generated from an incremental, one of the steps in the ladder, one of the rungs of the ladder gives out, but you just fall back down to the previous rung, and you hopefully you can jump over the rung that broke. I kind of want to segue into learning from failure because we're almost there. But before I do that, I want to speak for all the people who might be afraid of failure. And I think that there's a lot of us out there that are afraid of failure. What kind of advice could you give to those people who might struggle with taking that leap of faith when, they don't know what to do and they need to be called upon to experiment or hypothesize one of their steps, and they just have a hard time making that leap of faith? What kind of advice could you give them?
Yeah, I think the most important thing when it comes to being afraid of failure is realizing that you are the one who is going to see the most of it. I occasionally give, talks to graphic design students who are coming up through. And what I always tell them is, you're the only one who knows your portfolio. I don't know your portfolio. No one else does. So whenever you are making something, this is one of those hard realizations, but nobody cares as much about your work as you do. And nobody cares as much about your failures as you do. So whenever you are making something and it doesn't work out, you end up in this situation where, whether it's hard or soft, it's not hitting what you want. The only person who is really taking that as hard as you are is you. Most of the audience doesn't even know. I mean, we've released 115 items at this point, and there's been some absolute duds in there, but you know what? We have 114 other items that go along with that. We created a system that will never see the light of day because I realized I'm just not good enough to develop something like that at this moment. I'm not good enough to write it. It will never see the light of day because it wasn't a good system. And because of that, nobody knew, though. I mean, I talked about that here and there, but it never got released, and nobody's ever asked me about it because nobody pays attention as much as you do. So I think if you're afraid of failing, the weird advice that I would give you is to just realize that it's kind of like dancing alone, right? Even if you're bad at it, it doesn't really matter because no one else is watching. The only time that people are watching is when you draw attention to yourself, when you make those social media posts, and when you call attention to with marketing and so on. So if people aren't really watching, you don't have that much to be worried about whenever we're talking about kind of rapid iteration and the failure that comes with that. Draw attention to your wins, absolutely. But just remember that you you're the one who's watching what you're doing far more closely than anybody else possibly could be. You're the one who lives with you day to day. You're the one who lays there at 1 a.m. staring at the ceiling like, how do I make this happen? Or how did I let this happen? No one else is doing that. You know, somebody else, the person who you think is thinking about that is, you know, over watching something on Netflix and eating popcorn. They have no idea what you're doing. It's okay to fail because you're the only one who really focuses that much on it. Does anybody know any of my previous projects that didn't work out? I don't think anybody does unless I talk about them. So that's kind of what I use to comfort myself, you know, when I'm afraid of kind of starting something new or doing something that I don't understand. Even if I can't get it done, I'm the only one who's really going to be hard on me about it.
Yeah, I really like that advice, Matthew. I think, and even for things that are, you know, relatively public, if a failure happens and others notice, maybe they'll pay attention to it for that moment and then quickly move on to another thing. You know, like it's so fleeting. It's so.
No, I
so
should
fast.
clarify. We're talking about things like, oh, my item wasn't as good as I thought it was. Oh, my game wasn't as good as I thought it was. We're not talking about like, oh, I got outed as a racist. Don't. That's very different.
Yeah, that's absolutely that is not. That's not the kind of iterative failure we're talking about.
Right, exactly. I want to make sure, like, you know, people understand there is such a thing as the goldfish mentality when it comes to kind of a general public. But there's absolutely some things that you don't want to be doing. So make sure that you understand when we're talking about this kind of failure, we're talking about like, oh, you know, a project didn't go how we wanted, or you know, something I released wasn't as exciting as I thought, or wasn't as sound as I thought. Those kind of things, most people are going to move on from very quick. I mean, you know, I've had people say like, hey, this mechanic doesn't work how you think it does whenever I first started developing some items. And I'd be like, oh, sure enough, it doesn't. I've read that wrong for the last 10 years.
Yes,
all right, cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So for people, you know, late joiners to the chat tonight, that we're definitely talking about the iterative process and failing in your tabletop role-playing game projects.
Absolutely.
If you fail the tabletop role-playing game community because you're doing something harmful to other people in this community, that's not a failure. You're doing something wrong, and the community is better off without those people in the first place. So
don't be Satine Phoenix. That's what we're talking about.
Yes, exactly. With that being said, Matthew, I think failure, while it can be scary, if we can get over that hump, we can learn a lot from it, like you mentioned earlier in our conversation. I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about the kinds of lessons that failure can teach us, and also the things that we can do to make the most of those failures. Maybe there's strategies to document failure, or I like your post-mortem conversation. I think that's a really, really solid example. Are there other examples of things you can think of that we can do to make the most of failure when it happens?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're talking about a soft failure in an iterative process, the best thing that I've found is to document things quickly for yourself and then move on, but eventually come back to that document every once in a while. I have an F-ups document that I have for myself.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's just titled that. But within it are all the things that I have done that didn't work out for me, or the processes that I have tried that haven't worked out for me. No, I will not. I will not share a screen of that.
It's going to be in the show notes of the podcast episode.
Don't you dare. Don't you dare. No, but within that is all of the processes I've tried, the things that haven't worked out, the mechanical designs that have gone nowhere, the entirety of that board game project. Those are all within it because I find that you actually have created a lot, even in your failures, that are beneficial to future things. And within each failure is kind of there are multiple little pieces of good design, good development, good practices, good ideas. And whenever you are in the future trying to think about something and you're like, no, I tried to do this with X, which was something that you failed on. If you keep a document for yourself of those things, you can go back and look at it and say, okay, yes, I did that during this, but that's not why it failed. That wasn't the problem. This was a good piece. I can pull that forward and use it in my iterative process. And that's what, part of the iterative process is. You're taking the good, leaving the bad, and moving forward. But that can come back for years. I mean, I've developed items um, for AB that have pieces of mechanics from failed board games or failed developments, things that I wrote before, or have pieces of lore from Gloomhaven in it. So I think for me, documenting them, but not kind of dwelling on them. Take your time and throw it all in that document and then leave it. Walk away, go start with the next thing. But later, when you think of it, you can come back and kind of get that, bit of learning from it. That's a great way for me, at least, because once I'm 2 months on from a failure, that's so far in the back of my mind. I don't care anymore. It's, I can look at it and be like, that was stupid. Why did I do that? Rather than, kind of that feeling of personal kind of disappointment. So I think for me, that helps a lot. Obviously, I talked about the postmortem, but that's probably my biggest weapon in my arsenal when it comes to failure, is just keeping a nice folder and document structure of all the times that I've messed up. It's a great folder.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great thing. And I like how you said too, now when you look back on failure, you forget about it a couple months after. I think that speaks to the resilience that kind of comes with learning and failing, right? The first one's always going to hurt more than the second one, and so on and so forth. I think, or at least for me, the more you fail, the more you kind of build up a thick skin to it, and you kind of are able to brush it off.
You get good at it.
That's it. You get good at failure. That's exactly it.
Yep.
I will say though that, sometimes even if we build up that kind of resilience, if you put your love and your sweat and your tears into something, it can still sting. It can still sting. Sometimes some projects, when they fail, it stings much more than others. Do you have any strategies that you employ, Matthew, to kind of pick yourself back up from a failure that burned you particularly? It burned pretty hot that one time.
Yeah. It's called alcohol.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding. No, don't do that. For me, absolutely, a lot of what it is getting back to something that I loved again. So whenever something fails, you inevitably are left with a void. And that's what hurts. It's not the project failure is fine, but oftentimes you're left with like all of this time that you are working on that is no longer filled with the thing, if we're talking about a hard failure of a project. Or you're left with this feeling of like, well, what do I do next? And for me, the correct answer is always just go do something you love. Whatever it is, stop with the momentary dread in the kind of dwelling in the void, and just go do something you love, whether it's cuddling with your cats, taking a bike ride. For me, it's murdering thousands of demons in Diablo. But whatever it is that you love at the moment, just go back and do that for a while and give yourself permission to grieve. The loss of a project is sad. It always will be. And you don't need to immediately move on. I mean, I talk about fast iteration, but you don't need to, give yourself no time. Give yourself that day or two to kind of process. But do something you love while you're doing that. Don't get stuck in the repetitive rut of like, it's gone. What do I do next? What do I do next? A good friend of mine recently had a project that didn't really work out, but his next project was to dive back into something that he was really passionate about, which is creating a community around people that were like him and leaning into something positive by giving back to a community that he's been a part of. I don't want to talk too much about the project because I haven't cleared it with him to talk about it, but
that's fair. Yeah.
I think for him transitioning from this didn't work, I'm feeling bad about it, what can I do next? Well, I've wanted to give back to X community that I'm a part of. So I'm going to use the time that I was spending on my failed project and pour all of it back into relentless positivity for the community that I wanted to be a part of anyway. And I think that that's a way to move forward as well. Whether it's just getting back to something away from that you love, or redoubling your efforts with a completely new project. Either one can be really good paths forward whenever you run into the kind of those hard walls.
Yeah, I really like that 100%, Matthew. I think that's fantastic advice. And I think too, like you're saying, right, if you surround yourself with people in this community that can help lift you back up, that's super helpful too. If you have people who you can go to and see like, oh, I'm so upset that I failed at this thing in like a closed personal space while you're playing a game of Overwatch or you're playing a
Yeah,
game of Diablo, that can be cathartic in its own right too. So I think
absolutely.
yeah, I like that. I like that. And you'll find inspiration, right, in the things that you love. So if you're going and you're going for a walk on the hike, going to hike, oh my God, if you're going for a hike in the woods and that is inspirational to you, that's great because you're going to do that. You're
Yeah.
going to clear your mind. You're going to think of something else. If it's fighting demons in Diablo, that's what you're going to do to get to that level 76 rogue. Crank him out. Let's go.
That's
So
it. That's it.
that's it. Wonderful, wonderful. One last question about learning from failure, and this one here
Mhm.
is kind of broad. So, Matthew, stop me if I'm not really making sense. But to me, I find that this community, the Rising Tide Discord community, has members that are in like a lot of different stages of content creation. You've got people who
Mhm.
are, contemplating, thinking, conceptualizing of what they're going to make or create for the space. And there are other people who have like well-established businesses and Patreons and supporters, and they're doing their work and they're like several years into the journey. So
Yeah.
I'd be curious to know if, the advice that you've given up until now about coping with failure, learning from failure, and all of this, does it apply the same to everybody regardless of where they live on this journey, or are there certain things that people should focus on more when they're at the beginning of it, and then likewise for when they're further along in the journey?
Oh, it absolutely doesn't apply uh, evenly across the entire thing.
Okay. Okay.
So this is interesting, right? Because when you're first starting out, you have permission to fail big and fail spectacularly. I mean, fail with your whole heart. You can launch a project that you think is going to be everything, but when nobody's really looking, you have permission to just do all that weird stuff and see if it sticks, right? For us, whenever we were just starting this and we had like 50 followers and like there's nobody giving us money, right? That's whenever I was doing some of the work that I was the most conceptual, right? That's whenever I was
Mm.
writing kind of things that were big, and that's whenever like I developed a lot of these systems. It just didn't work, but that's because we were starting, and I had nobody over my shoulder. I had nothing to really kind of keep me um dialed into to being better. um and that's exciting because at that time you have permission to fail big, fail spectacular. Once you start building a following, and especially once you start talking about something like a Patreon or like any sort of subscription service, whether it's coffee, Patreon, whatever, Ko-fi, I don't know how they pronounce it. Um, but once you have those kind of things, then you have to start transitioning away from the big failures. But the good news is, once you are in a process where you're getting um, when you have kind of a following, and you have uh, Patreon supporters and so on, you've already done a lot of the failing by that point, the big failing, and you've already gotten yourself into an area of what works. So at that point, you transition into smaller failures, quicker iterations. Rather than taking those big, massive risks, you start taking those iterative risks that we're talking about. And you can set yourself up in a different way. So whenever we were first starting, I would say, I'm going to spend the next month writing this system. And if I failed in writing that system whenever we were first starting, that's totally okay, because nobody was waiting on it. Nobody really
Mm-hmm.
cared where it was going, whatever. But once we were in this process where it's, we need to put out an item each week, we need to do one more thing each month. We have a couple collabs coming up. We have a thing I can't talk about coming. The process then shifted to, okay, I'm going to give myself X number of hours to work on this, and if it's not going anywhere, I kill it. And that's kind of the transition you have to make once you get a little bigger.
Mm.
When you're just starting out, fail hard, man. Do it big. Go in. But once you're kind of further along in the process, you have to start setting those limits for yourself. Say, I'm going to write on this mechanical piece for I'm going to give myself 10 hours to develop something interesting. If I can't develop something interesting in that time that I feel like continuing to work on, kill it, continue on with the stuff that's working. So that's something that you learn as you go. The advice doesn't apply evenly, but it's really exciting when you're new because, man, you get to fail so big. Anyway, sorry.
I really appreciate that, actually, because I wasn't really sure what the answer to that question was going to be. I definitely 100% expected you to say, yeah, when you start off, no one's really there to expect anything, so you can do what you want. But I really like that advice of like setting limits on yourself once you do have people that are following you, once you do have people who are, subscribed to some kind of service with you, because you also have established that reputation of, once a week or once a month or whatever it is, something's coming out and people are waiting on that. So you don't want to necessarily be spending too much time on something if it's not going to go anywhere. So I really, really like that advice. And it segues extremely well into the next pillar that I want to talk to you about. And that is precisely this idea of how your reputation as a content creator is associated to the products that you deliver. And if those things are failing, what does that mean for your reputation? It's tricky. And I think you gave some really solid advice just in that answer. But I think one thing that I really wanted to ask you, Matthew, was I think it's important to come across to the people that have an expectation, that expect, for instance, for you, a magic item to come out every, it's once a week, right? On your release cycle.
Yep.
So
every Thursday.
They're expecting that. Yeah. And they've come to expect them to be fantastic because they're always so good. So what do you do? Like, how do you how do you deliver quality products while still pushing your limits and trying new things and experimenting without like burning yourself out or overachieving or like that's, and that's a bit of a loaded question, I guess, but I'd be curious to know what you do.
Hey, I love loaded questions. They're the ones that produce the most. The reality of it is that once you get to a point where you're producing something on a regular schedule, you need to make two important decisions for yourself very early. When you're setting your release schedule, you need to determine exactly how often you can release something without stressing yourself at all. So this is going to be important for what I'm going to set up next. You need to, so for us, we can make an item in a week, no problem, super easy. We could probably make 2 or 3 items in a week, but we don't. The reason that we don't is because the rest of the time allows us to fail.
Okay.
Cool. So for us, setting that schedule, there's a lot of creators that release more often than us. I mean, Griff releases an item every day, but there are people who release more often than us. But what we tend to do is spend more time on each individual release. And then when you set that release schedule, the next natural step that comes after that, if you set a stress-free release schedule, the next natural step is that you learn how to optimize the steps that you've already made. So a good example for us is that Fernando, it used to take him 2 or 3 nights to illustrate an item because he would do a rough sketch, transfer that into a fine sketch, and then he would do his flats, and then he would paint it. That would be the process that he would go through. He has now changed that such that he goes from rough sketch to flats to paint. He doesn't do the fine sketch. That was sucking a lot of time out of his process, and it didn't really make results that much better. And something that he learned from that was that he got better at just doing the illustrating, like actually painting the actual paint part of it. He got better at that because he wasn't relying on the crutch of a fine sketch. So now he's able to illustrate an item in a night. For me, in my process, I do like the graphic design, exporting all of our formats and so on. I optimized it by creating an Illustrator layout for myself that has all of our formats in one set of artboards, and it's all linked to one artwork symbol, and everything within it is pulled in via a data set now. So now I just have to put in where the image is located, where, or what text is present, what the rarity is, what the item level is for Pathfinder, so on and so forth. It's all done in Markdown. It pulls it in and then exports the item for me. It takes about 8 minutes once I have the writing finished to export all of our formats. Before, it was taking me like 3-4 hours because I was doing it individually. So once you have your schedule set, then you learn to spend a lot of time focusing on how can you optimize your schedule. Once you get your schedule optimized, then you can tackle the other things and give yourself more time to fail. So I think that for me, the important part was set that schedule, optimize. Once you're optimized, give yourself time. And then don't immediately pack it. Don't immediately pack it with other things that you're going to tell people that you're definitely doing right now.
Yes, that's it. Because if you set a standard for yourself to give yourself space, you want to keep that space. Absolutely. I really like that. I have one last question for you, Matthew, and then I'm going to go. We have a couple of questions in the RT discussion text chat that I'm going to jump to. So very, very quickly, I wanted to ask you about a specific situation where a content creator might find themselves or might desire to do like a pivot. Maybe they were making maps. Now they want to pivot and start writing content, or vice versa, or who knows? Maybe they're a podcaster and they're going to pivot and do like a actual play. I don't know.
Yeah.
The exact specifications don't totally matter, but this concept of kind of changing their existing business model or doing something unrelated to what they're usually doing. Presumably there's going to be a lot of failure happening in that kind of instance because they're doing something new. So I'd like to know if you have specific advice for that kind of context, and if there's spaces that people should consider using, like beta test spaces, or using an audience to peer review stuff, or I'm not too sure. But what kind of tools could people use in their arsenal to maintain the reputation of the brand that they've established while successfully pivoting to something else?
So we did this. This absolutely happened with AB. If you were following us early, you would know that we were doing a lot of things that didn't work. So the first one was that we were constantly trying to just develop systems. That was a thing that we were going to do. We still develop systems, absolutely, and we release them as one more things on our Patreon. Originally, that's kind of what our focus was on. We were going to develop large-scale systems or medium-scale systems that could tack onto various games, and that would be, something that was our regular release schedule. To keep people tied over in that time, we started doing magic items just as like a little, fun, like, oh, hey, here's some magic items just to keep you interested. And we quickly realized people like those a lot. So for us, it was a matter of listening to our audience, at least at that time. Whenever you are thinking about making a pivot, I would say just stick with what you're doing for a little bit if you can, and start to do some of those things as extras. And look at what your audience says about them. Look at how they react to it. Look at how people perceive it. If you are if you're a an adventure writer, and you start kind of including a map here and there. You are starting to get into cartography and you like it. And you start including a map here and there. And people start to enjoy those maps. Scale it out a little bit, piece by piece, until you are in a place where people who are in your audience are used to you doing those things. And then you can kind of say, like, hey, so I know that this was kind of where we originally started, but I have to say that my passion is in X now. I'm really liking this a lot more. I understand that for some folks, that's not going to be what you want. That's fully fine. But I'm going to follow that passion. And what you will see a lot of the time from a lot of supporters, people that are in your audience, most people are totally fine with you following what you're excited about because they are excited about the things that you're making. You need
Mm-hmm.
to be interested in what you're making in order for anybody else to really care that much about it. So I think if you're trying to make a pivot, take it slow. Make sure that you are following this not because you think that it will be more profitable, but make sure that you're following it because you think it'll be something that's more exciting for you. If you are pivoting from something that you don't like into something that you don't like, but you think it would be more profitable, I don't think that's a good move for you. If
Mm-hmm.
you're thinking about pivoting from something that you're doing to something else, make sure that you're doing it because you're more passionate about the thing that you want to go towards. And as far as like, what tools to use when you're doing a thing like that, reach out to other creators in the space. Most of us are willing to talk at length about a lot of things. So, reach out to your fellow people in the community, reach out to others that you want to talk to, and learn about the realities of what they're creating, especially if, say, you're pivoting into cartography away from like scene illustrations or creature illustrations. Um, Talk to cartographers, learn about their realities, learn about their challenges, and see if that's something that you want to get yourself into. For
Mm-hmm.
us, we did a lot of discussion early with some friends we had made in the space who were also magic item creators, Shiny Press, as well as Mithril Canvas and Dungeon Strugglers, who we're still great friends with. But early in that, we talked about what kind of their struggles were, what were some of the things that they still struggle with, what kind of things do they love about it. And when you can speak to other creators who are in that thing that you're looking to pivot at, you'll learn a lot more than if you just browse around, Reddit for some amount of time
Mm-hmm.
or browse around Patreon or so on. Um, Reach out, make those connections, make friendships. I always advocate for people making friends in the space because you will inevitably need them anyway.
Yeah, very good advice. And I think that it helps to have people in the space to go to, like we were saying earlier, right?
Mhm.
To talk to about your successes, to talk to about candidly about your failures. It's nice to have people to
Yeah.
go to and be a shoulder.
And all those insecurities.
That's it.
All
That's
the
it.
Yep.
And so
Yep.
let's go over quickly to the questions from the audience
Yeah.
in the RT discussions chat. We have a couple. The first is from Gold, and Gold shares a sentiment and would like to hear your reaction. So the sentiment is as follows. Thiel argues that often the cause of failure is too complicated to result in easy applicable lessons. Most businesses fail for more than one reason. So when a business fails, you often don't learn anything at all because the failure was overdetermined. You will think it failed for reason one, but it really failed for reason 1 through 5. And so the next business you start will fail for reasons through 2 and then 3 and so on. So what's your
Mhm.
reaction or thoughts related to that, Matthew?
That's an interesting way of putting it because typically whenever we're talking about something that got to a place of success and then fell down, we're talking about something that failed for a series of reasons. Now, when you're saying like, oh, this thing fell apart, the wheels fell off it early, you can usually point to, a couple things and learn something from that. But if we're talking about a business that has reached some moderate level of success, is pulling some amount of money, you will not see the things that brought it down for quite some amount of time. And that's okay. I think that when you kind of immediately try to identify all of the things that went wrong with it, you're never going to be able to accurately identify those, because if you would have been able to accurately identify those, you wouldn't have failed to begin with. You would have fixed up those problems in the meantime.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the reasons that I advocate for kind of a post-mortem when a business or something, a large project fails, is not for the reason of identifying exactly what happened. It's to give closure to those who were involved in it. It's to let everybody just talk about it in those like, man, this was really fun. This was great. This was cool. Yeah, this part really hurt. This didn't work. It's permission to get everybody together and do something a little fun, but also just kind of air those things and grieve a little bit about the project.
And like kind of like a sober second thought, right? Like it's past, it's gone. Let's look back at it with the clear vision of retroactively looking at something, for sure.
Right. But don't try to identify necessarily reasons or anything like that. Give yourself time, because those reasons will become more evident as you fail more.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. DeMille asked a question about watching your babies fail. We did talk about bouncing back a little bit. So DeMille, if it's all right, I'm going to skip over that question and go to the next one. The next question actually is also from DeMille, and she asks where she can get AB t-shirt like the one that you're wearing.
Nowhere yet. These were actually produced by our good friend Matt from Gem Firefly Dungeon Glitch on Twitter and a few other places. He made them for us at our PAX Unplugged journey, but give us 23 days. Give us 23 days and you will be able to purchase one of these, as well as several other designs and other things that we have coming. And there's a prototype over there that I can't lift up yet, but okay.
That's good. That's good to know. So people will have to go follow you on Twitter to hear the announcement for where they can buy that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's great. Two more questions, and we'll try to get through them as fast as we can. One is from Ben, Tabletop Current, and Ben asks, your Twitter is a fun place to interact with. Sorry, he put an emoji and my brain stopped working. But yeah, your Twitter is a fun place to interact. Do you find it a struggle to keep it going? And have you had any successes growing into other spaces?
Do I have a struggle keeping it going? Yes, every day. It's never easy. I hate social media with a burning passion. But
I can second that.
Yeah, it's not fun. Every day I have struggles with it. The reality of it is, though, I know that the things that I'm making and putting out bring joy to people. They use them in their games. And that, for me, is more important than the momentary whining of me opening up TweetDeck to respond to some very nice comments from people or some jokes or whatever. Do I get the occasional not nice comment? Absolutely. But that's okay, because the overwhelming majority are supportive. Yes, it's difficult. I get real tired of it often, but I keep it going because I fully understand that it's important to continue interacting with the people that are around. And I will tell you that I often read things throughout the day that restore faith in humanity. So that said, make lists for yourself of people that you actually want to follow. Keep them tight, and don't go browsing the For You tab. Have I had any successes?
Yeah, that's good advice.
Yeah, the second part. Have you had any successes in growing into other spaces? Yes. Pinterest has grown quite well. Reddit as well, even though Reddit's trying to burn itself to the ground currently. Instagram has been decent, though I will tell you I don't really understand Instagram that well. Currently, Tumblr, we're still kind of starting with that. I don't really understand Tumblr that well either.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that Blue Sky.
I'm surprised those videos of
Fernando. Oh yeah,
like the time lapse videos.
Yeah,
I feel like those would go bananas on Instagram, like as a reel or
Yeah.
something. But
I'm sure they would.
no, not so much.
Yeah, I'm sure they would. I've just never posted them. I should do that. That's a good thought. But yeah,
Fair enough. I mean, it's hard to keep up with one
mhm.
one social media platform, let alone several. So you're doing it.
Yeah.
You're doing a good job as it is.
Thank you. Yes, but short answer: Pinterest, Reddit have been great for us as well. Really, Pinterest. I like Pinterest a lot.
Cool.
Anyway,
it's a neat place. I've never considered using that. Anyway, yeah, that's great. I'm happy you guys are having success there. One last question from that gamer. Sure.
share.
I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Share? Oh, share. Yeah, oh my god, of course. So she asks, how early or late during the iteration process would you recommend before you open your project up to the public? So doing like an alpha launch to get feedback.
Okay. Where in your iterative process should you do that? So you should have what I would call a private group. These are the people, your privileged few. They are the ones that you send a DM to at 2:30 a.m. And you're like, I don't know what this is. Read. Once those folks have had a chance to kind of look at it, and you are comfortable enough to share it with that private circle, don't share with the public too early. You're going to probably get a lot of not great feedback from the public. This is, it sounds kind of mean, but a lot of people don't really know what game development is. They don't really know what mechanical development is. They don't know what an iterative process is like, so on. And you'll get a lot of bad feedback from the public. So for me, what it is I usually start with idea phase, then I move quickly on to rapid iteration until I get something that is functional, and that's all. There's not a lot of flavor to it, but it's functional. Then I share it with my inner circle. They give me feedback and say, you need these people that are not afraid to tell you that this sucks. Like, get those people and hold them tight. They're good. But once they've told you what parts suck, then go back, reiterate, keep those going. And once they've stopped telling you that things suck, add a little bit of flavor and then release to the public. If they still have some like minor quibbles and stuff like that, that's okay to put out to the public because people will say the same things anyway. But in your iterative process, don't put your stuff out to the public until you've had the chance to screen it by a few people that you trust and they've gotten all the big complaints out of the way. You don't want to launch something to the public that has big complaints. You want those little like, oh, this would be great if you fix this. And it's like, yeah, well, somebody already told me that and I'm already fixing it. Thanks so much for the feedback. That's a great idea. We're definitely going to do that. That's kind of how I handle that.
Yeah. I find too the general public tends to be really good at finding the bugs in places that require you to do something silly like rolling 500 dice at once in a virtual tabletop or something like that. That's the kind of stuff that probably an inner circle wouldn't have time or energy to figure out. And it's not really mission critical, but it's a bug you could probably figure out.
Yeah.
Like I find like mechanics too sometimes, or like there's like an abusive circle of mechanics that can be used to like infinitely loop a game or something. That's and anyway, cool. Thank you, Matthew. I think that covers everything in the RT discussion, the questions there. So now is kind of the time of the show where we wrap things up. So I guess before I move on, Matthew, I wanted to thank you very much for being here tonight to talk to us about failure. It's been a fantastic discussion. I know I've learned a whole lot about it. Before we say our goodbyes, I wanted to give you the opportunity to kind of share any last thoughts or considerations that you might have about failure that we didn't get a chance to explore tonight, if there are any. And then, of course, if, once you've done your parting words, please also remind us where people can find you, find AbyssalBrews, and all of the amazing content that you guys create.
Yeah, kind of the thing that I always end these discussions on, because I've done full, kind of full length talks about this on campus and in a few other places. But the thing that I always end on whenever I'm talking about failure is that I tell people to go forward, fail more and fail better. And fail better is something that I keep really close to my chest. It means that every time that I will botch something, the next time I will not botch the same thing. I will botch it in a different way. And then the time after that, it'll be a different one. But slowly, eventually, I won't fail. So just fail more, fail better. If you want to find us, you can find us in all of the places. So you can find us at our website, AbyssalBrews.com. And from there, you can also find us on Patreon, where we make weekly magic items as well as monthly extras. You can get them in a ton of formats. We make them for D&D 5e as well as Pathfinder 2e now. Yeah, it's exciting.
Awesome.
And then you can find us on Twitter, Pinterest, any other social media except for TikTok at AbyssalBrews.
Awesome. Yeah. And so thanks again, Matthew. I highly recommend everybody listening to this, whether that be live or in the podcast format, to go check out Matthew and Fernando's amazing creations. Abyssal Brews cooks up some really cool stuff. I'd also like to recommend that you follow the Rising Tide on social as well. So if you can find us at TTRPG Rising Tide on Twitter and on Mastodon. Those are kind of the only two places that we're at right now. And we'd appreciate it if you could spread the word with other content creators. You know, this is a space for content creators by content creators, and we're always looking for more people to join the fray. So I've been Matt. You can find me on socials at roll_play_chat. And this has been another Rising Tide Talk. Join us live in our Discord community for our next event taking place Monday, June 26th at 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, where we will be talking to DM Dave about how he turned his passion into a career. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Matthew. And remember, folks, that a rising tide lifts all boats. So let's be a part of this together.